So a couple of quick ones, Steve. You know, when we were planning the session, I hadn't realized just how exciting and important it would be. And those of you that joined yesterday's opening ceremony would have seen that regulatory was sort of center stage all the time in the comments from our keynote speaker, Trevor Mundell. And then we also had the pleasure of having Dr. Toomey, who was part of this meeting in the opening ceremony. So I really think that we've got a good session going here. We will be recording the session. We'll also have somebody that will try to write up some things from here. So I'm looking forward to the whole discussions. Thanks, Steve. Please proceed from your side.
All right, great. Well, thanks, Colin. So without any further delay, I'll turn over the first presentation to Dr. Kristen Carlson from the Swedish Regulatory Authority, MPA. And Kristen, the floor is yours. And I think you'll present from your screen, correct?
Yes, correct.
Okay, great.
Can you see my screen now?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Perfect. So thank you for inviting me to give you a flavor of what the European and in particular the Swedish approach to pharmacometrics data and regulatory decision making is, and maybe just a few words on my own background. I am a senior pharmacometrician at the Swedish MPA. I'm also the chair of the Modeling and Simulation Working Party at EMA. And I've been working at the Swedish agency for 6 years now. So let's see if I can, there we go. So just the normal disclaimer. These are mainly my own views. And what I want to talk to you about today is the sort of overall regulatory value of model-informed drug development. And some just to understand the potential and the challenges that we face in Europe is to give you an overview of the regulatory process in EU, and then some of the pharmacometrics capacity in EU and Sweden, and some concluding remarks. So first, what I find to be the regulatory value of model-informed drug development, or quantitative approaches, or pharmacometrics, or whatever you want to call it, is at various stages. Early on in the drug development, it can enable early informed discussion from our side with sponsors regarding study design and endpoints and dose regimens and data needed to support benefit risk decisions. And then at the market authorization application stage, you can support your benefit risk decisions by quantifying uncertainties and their clinical consequences based on prior knowledge of the disease, mechanism, and compound level. And you can also propose risk mitigation activities, update posology sections of the product information, and maybe one of the most common uses are for special populations. And you can also inform the contents of the risk management plan. And post-marketing, you can use quantitative approaches for support of signal detection and assessment and life cycle management. And to do so, when you use quantitative approaches, you put different levels of scrutiny on them depending on how they're used. And I know this picture has been shown many times, but I still like it, so I use it again. So depending on what you use your model for, also governs the way we as regulators look at it. So if you use a model to describe some sort of scenario, we might see it as a low impact, and it's supportive, and we will not put very high regulatory burden on that analysis. If it's a medium impact scenario where you want to use a modeling and simulation to justify some decisions that you are making, we will look at it a little bit more in detail and have some higher standards for what is needed for a model to be qualified, for example, or applicable. And then you have the high impact scenario where you want to use modeling and simulation to replace some other type of evidence, replace a study or something else. And then that's, from our perspective, a very high impact scenario where we put very high standards and on the models so that they are verified and that precisions are good and so on. So it's all a lot of our time we spend on putting things into context. What is it used for, and what is then our how do we use the model-informed decision for a model-informed decision? And some examples of current use of modeling and simulation that we see in regulatory submissions is, for one thing, description of PK and PD data and quantitative characterization of their determinants and covariates. So this might be seen as the sort of standard phase 3 POP-PK analysis where you try to understand the impact of various covariates. So that's more or less, or it is standard in any new application. We also see characterization of the impact of change in formulation on drug efficacy or safety. So what happens if you go from an immediate release tablet to a modified release tablet, or if you go from an IV administration to a subcutaneous administration. Those types of documentation, we all often see model-based information for that. Thank you for turning off the background noise. Also, characterization of the impact of change in dosing regimen on drug efficacy or safety. So if you go from a 3-week dosing regimen to a 6-week dosing regimen, that is a very common use of modeling, and we have several examples of where that has been possible on simulated data. So that would be a very high impact scenario, of course, but it's also good use of models. You can also use modeling to waive a dose finding study for a new indication and to show that you can use a dose that has been established in another indication and use that for extension to a new indication to be studied, but no new dose finding is needed. Another common use these days is to waive a clinical drug-drug interaction study by using PDPK modeling mostly. And also the next scenario that we see is waive a PK, PK/PD, or efficacy and safety trial or parts of such a trial in unstudied or limited studied population. So that's an extrapolation scenario, for example, into children or into other populations or rare diseases. And we in Europe also see a lot of quantitative approaches used in the pediatric investigation plans. So these are, I would say, the most common scenarios that we see, but it's definitely increasing, and we see more and more of quantitative analyses at various stages in the documentation sent to us. So how do we do this in Europe? How do we do these assessments? And to understand that, it's good to know how the process in a centralized procedure takes place in Europe. So the applicant first send their application to EMA, that then will send it to CHMP, which is the Committee for Human Medicinal Products, and they will then assign a rapporteur and a co-rapporteur. So those are two different countries that will, in parallel, write 2 different assessment reports. And when they have done that, the rest of the member states within EU get the chance to peer review those reports and check if they agree with the assessments, or if there's something has been missed, or if there's it's a peer review system. So you have the chance to add or maybe say that these questions are not needed, or we agree. And after that period, it's the list of questions is sent, and they have a discussion at CHMP. And if there's a list of questions, which is always the case in the first round of assessment, that list of questions will be sent to the applicant, and they will have a chance to respond. And then you will do this circle again for as many times as needed, but most of the time it can be concluded after 3 rounds of assessments. And then it's sent from the CHMP to the European Commission. But since we have all these different member states, and everyone are supposed to be able to assess and understand, it causes some challenges to have all countries to have the capacity that's needed. If it's a very small country and you don't have all the different assessment skills, you will not assess a full new application. But it's still it's difficult to have the capacity at all different agencies. And to understand a little bit more maybe about the EMA framework that we have at the top part, the European Commission, that is the body that actually takes the decision on to approve or not to approve, and EMA, the European Medicines Agency, below that, and within EMA or below EMA, so to say, we have a different large pool of committees. So CHMP is the Human Medicinal Product Committee, and we have a veterinarian, we have a pharmacovigilance, PDCO, which is the pediatric committee, and we have an orphan committee, we have for advanced therapies, and a committee for herbal medicinal products. And as a pharmacometrician, we are mostly involved in the CHMP procedures, but sometimes and also the PDCO procedures, but mainly CHMP, I would say. And under CHMP, there's a range of expert working parties. And those, both the committees and the working parties, consist of experts from the national competent authorities. So it's the different experts from the various countries that come together and take the decisions. And the working parties serve a very, very important role, I would say, in this pretty complex structure that we have. And so now we have a working party called Modeling and Simulation Working Party. There is a reorganization going on, but this is what it looks like at the moment. And that is a very important forum for us as pharmacometricians to meet and to harmonize. And we also serve as support group for the Scientific Advice Working Party that's also under CHMP, and also PDCO. And as of right now, we have 21 members and observers from various countries, and most of our pharmacometricians in EU are members of the Modeling and Simulation Working Party. So it's very important for us to have this type of group where you can, especially for the agencies that are smaller and maybe have 1 or 2 pharmacometricians, it's of essence, I would say, to have a pool of people where you can discuss, and you can just send a question to someone, who can I discuss with? So this is has been very important over the years. And we also serve, as I said, as support for PDCO that doesn't have pharmacometricians of their own, and also for the scientific advice. And as you see, we also have some academically affiliated experts in this group, and they are also closely affiliated with a national agency. So some national agency have internal, most have internal pharmacometricians, but some agencies also rely on external experts as consultants, and they are then academics. So then, to tell you a little bit about the pharmacometrics at the Swedish Medical Product Agency, we have now 5 dedicated pharmacometricians as of December last year. That's the most we have ever had. We all have PhDs from Uppsala University. Surprise, surprise. It's very close by, so it's very fortunate for us to have a pool of very good candidates. But it's still, in the past, it has not been the most attractive workplace, but now we have, I think, shown that it's a very fun place to work. And we are all involved in assessments of initial marketing authorization applications, but maybe even more in new indication applications, because there you see much more bridging approaches and extrapolation of various sorts. So I think we spend a lot of our time on those type of applications, and also on scientific advice, where you see a lot of dose selection questions and exposure response analysis, where we come in. And then there can be various other types of applications, but those 3 are the most important. And how we work in Europe in general is that we review the applicant's documentation. As of now, it's not required to send in raw data to EMA submissions. Actually, I don't think we can. You can't submit it in your application. So it's a review process on the documentation that the analysis reports. We can request data if we want to. It's then up to the assessor to do so, and we do that sometimes. But the whole system is not really set up for having access and working with raw data. So it's more on a personal level, and whether your agency have invested in the software that are needed. But at MPA we can and we have access to the softwares that are required. And the keys to our success at MPA, and the reason that we are 5 pharmacometricians at MPA alone, is that we have a critical mass. You're not sort of singled out. You have people to discuss with, and we help each other. We work very closely, and it makes it can be very tough sometimes to take regulatory decisions, and you never feel alone in that. So that's very important. And we have weekly meetings for internal support just within the pharmacometricians, but we then invite other assessors to that meeting to put our assessment into context. We also have multidisciplinary assessor teams for any product or any process, which is very, very important to put our assessment into perspective. And we work in particularly close with PK assessors and clinical assessors. So it's an extremely fun place to work, I would say. But it's also because we have this multidisciplinary team thinking, and that we also work very closely within the pharmacometric team. And with that, I would like to conclude and say that the use of quantitative approaches within regulatory decision-making is increasing rapidly, I would say. And to increase the acceptance of MIDD, it's good to have early interaction with regulatory bodies and to have that possibility open. And that the assessment of model-informed drug development is a multidisciplinary effort that cannot be said too many times. It's really important to put the modeling into context, and to do so, you need to have the whole team around you. Thank you very much for listening.
Great. Thank you very much, Kristen. That was really helpful and really insightful to be able to see the range of structure within EMA and then also within MPA. I'm glad you noted how many pharmacometricians work in MPA, because that discussion point came up yesterday with some of the African authorities who were talking about the size of their teams and the challenge of having that critical mass. So we're going to hold off on questions until after the next presentation, if that's okay. And I'll turn it over now to Dr. Raj Matabushi from the USFDA, and he's going to give us a perspective of the USFDA's experience with pharmacometrics. Raj, over to you.
Thank you, Steve. I just want to check to make sure if you can see slides.
Yes, yep, it's great. I'm going to put it in slideshow and good to go. You're in the presenter. Yeah, there you go. You got it. Great.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you, Steve. A little bit about myself. Raj Matabushi. I'm the Associate Director for Guidance and Scientific Policy in the Office of Clinical Pharmacology. And I have been a pharmacometrics reviewer close to around 10 years. And also as a clinical pharmacology team leader. Quick disclaimer, these are all my views, similar to what Kirsten said. So to set up for today's presentation, this particular quote from Nellie McClung comes to my mind. People must know the past to understand the present and to face the future. So with that as the inspiration, I will share with you the evolution of pharmacometrics at the Office of Clinical Pharmacology. I should have noted that my talk today predominantly focuses on experiences from the Office of Clinical Pharmacology perspective. So if we go back in time, the earliest applications of pharmacometrics can be traced all the way up to the last decade of the last century, which involved predominantly applications as they were associated with the product related characteristics such as in vitro in vivo correlation, and maybe descriptive activities such as characterizing the understanding of PK/PD relationships as well as population pharmacokinetics. In fact, USFDA and Center for Drug Evaluation and Research made first investments into having a pharmacometrics staff. So the pharmacometrics group was formed in the later parts of that decade. Soon after, we saw a very rapid growth of pharmacometrics, not only in the form of regulatory submissions, but also as part of regulatory review activities. And these were also associated with a series of guidance documents that came to be published in the areas describing population pharmacokinetics, dose response or exposure response, clinical trial simulations. In fact, the early disease modeling activities as well as applications of physiologic-based pharmacokinetic modeling. Okay, thank you for muting the noise. As well as some initial forays.
Dr. Raja, sorry, we are experiencing problems, technical problems here at the venue, but we're trying to reconnect now.
Sure, let me know. I will pause here.
Yeah, so I just wanted to pause.
Sorry about that.
Okay, no problem.
Sorry about that.
All right. We're about to join just now.
Okay, the room. We lost the room, Raj.
Yeah.
Not an issue. I can pause.
Should be back in the next minute.
Okay, looks like we are back on. Can someone confirm?
Yes, we can confirm we hear you.
Okay, maybe I will step back and maybe go through once again, just to make sure everyone is on the same page. So I was initially talking about the early days where the Pharmacometrics group was formed, and we saw a rapid growth in the following decade, predominantly with respect to not only applications in the regulatory submissions, but also in regulatory reviews, and also publishing of regulatory guidances around population pharmacokinetics, dose response, exposure response, and also uptake of clinical trial simulations and initial days of disease modeling PDPK activities. One of the important steps we also tried to attempt was to carve out a unique forum for regulatory interactions in the form of end of phase 2A meetings, which were designed to foster interactions over application of pharmacometrics modeling and simulation to inform the drug development, specifically the later phases of drug development, such as the phase 2 and phase 3. And with that growing responsibility, we also saw increase in the number of staff. So from a group, which is around 4 to 5 staff entity, to a division of pharmacometrics, which grew enough. And currently, Division of Pharmacometrics is one of the largest divisions in the Office of Clinical Pharmacology, with a staff of up to close to around 35 pharmacometricians. The second decade of this century has been a constant progress towards pharmacometrics being accepted as one of the mainstream disciplines as part of drug development as well as regulatory reviews. So we started seeing all the regulatory submissions, almost all of the regulatory submissions having some component of pharmacometrics. Invariably, we would have conventional pharmacometrics as well as PDPK, and nowadays we are even seeing applications of quantitative systems pharmacology, which also we start seeing. In addition to that, we also started seeing from the community perspective, working towards making these quantitative tools to be made available to inform drug development in the form of drug development tools. So we started figuring out ways on how we can create acceptance of these quantitative tools that can inform specific drug developments. And with that, we also started seeing incorporation of model-informed drug development principles in not only our guidances, which are specifically technical, but also for the clinical development guidances. And in later of that particular decade, around 2018, we got a boost in the form of congressional authorization for identifying model-informed drug development, which I will touch upon, and also a new regulatory interaction pathway called as Model-Informed Drug Development Paid Meeting Pilot Program. So these are the range of activities that have happened over a period of time, and I'm pretty sure we are all looking forward to what happens going forward and what might be the challenges and how to get there. And before I close the presentation, I hope to touch upon that. So before I go ahead into figuring out what might be the next stage for pharmacometrics or model-informed drug development, very quickly want to touch upon the value proposition of pharmacometrics. Dr. Carlson presented many of these. What I'm showing you here is a range of publications that we have published from the early days of pharmacometrics presence at the Office of Clinical Pharmacology. And these have included specific case studies or compilation of similar types of applications as they relate to either drug approvals or labeling. And these also span across various types of methodologies, whether it be conventional pharmacometrics or PDPK or systems pharmacology, whether it be for new molecules, small molecules, biologics, biosimilars, or whether it be in adults, pediatrics, or for specific extrinsic factors, or even generic products. So this is not a comprehensive list, but I'm hoping this provides a flavor of the range of applications that we have seen from the Office of Clinical Pharmacology as it pertains to the application of pharmacometrics. And the value is self-evident. In a nutshell, if we were to summarize, these applications fall into one of these four categories. Either they have advanced our understanding of dose selection or dose optimization, informing future clinical trials, or providing critical support for evidence of efficacy or supporting a regulatory decision making. And when these applications have matured in any specific areas, they have translated into development of policy. So in a nutshell, the value of pharmacometrics has been there, and it's been there for quite some time. So what is it that we need to take into account to take the steps into the future? So to understand that, we need to get a feel for what might be the enablers or disablers for advancement of pharmacometrics. And we did a survey several years ago with the staff in the Division of Pharmacometrics and some of the senior leadership in the Office of Clinical Pharmacology. And I'm listing here in no particular order. What we found was the applications of model-informed drug development have been successful when we have seen acceptance by multidisciplinary teams, when we have created an environment that fosters collaboration, not only between the technical experts, but also technical experts and other multidisciplinary decision makers. When there is an organizational alignment and prioritization and support provided for application of these activities, and when they are paired with education and training, not only for technical experts, but also for decision makers to be able to appreciate these aspects, and when there are methodological advancements which have enabled more powerful applications. On the flip side, the disablers have been when there was lack of transparency or gaps in the knowledge, when there were no best practices that were available for determining whether a model is fit for purpose or not, which led to inconsistent applications. Nowadays, we are seeing a lot of data and knowledge being available, but the key for future would be to be able to better utilize this information, especially at a regulatory agency where there is a lot of inflow of information. And consistent with some of the enablers, the varying degrees of comfort or discomfort from the end users and need for clarity on regulatory expectations for some of the emerging applications. So with this as the backdrop, we at the Office of Clinical Pharmacology at USFDA, we got a boost from the Congress in our Prescription Drug User Fee Act, the 6th iteration of it, where model-informed drug development, which brought in all the pharmacometrics and other quantitative applications, which relied on translation of our understanding of biology, pathology, physiology, pharmacology to help with various decision-making under one umbrella, and provided a unique focus by identifying it as one of the drug development tools to enhance regulatory review and drug development. And this provided us an opportunity to advance model-informed drug development in a holistic and an integrative approach. I will go into a little bit of detail of the fundamental approaches that we have taken under this. The first is to make sure that we increase capacity. Even though we have close to around 35 pharmacometricians, the demand is so much growing that there is always a tussle for the resources to be able to apply some of these principles where appropriate. So increasing capacity as well as expertise with a lot of new methodologies coming on the horizon to be able to address the growing demands of innovations. And to this end, we have tried to address it with some infusion of resources, which is always limited, but also paired it with education and training. And these education and training activities are not only aimed at technical expertise, but also for other multidisciplinary stakeholders. And we have invested in developing curricula and program. I'm pretty sure Dr. Barrett is going to touch upon some of these activities that we have worked with them. The second is to ensure that we develop standards and best practices that would lead to consistent application and evaluation. And to that end, we have made specific investments towards development of scientific guidances, standard operating procedures, or any templates or resources that will help with this consistent application of some of these mature approaches. And lastly, to create an environment that increases stakeholder acceptance. And we found that this is the most important step that we need to take with respect to ensuring the successful application of model-informed drug development approaches. And to this end, we have been engaging the stakeholders at various public workshops, as well as creating novel regulatory avenues to engage with the internal decision makers as well as stakeholders. And to this end, I will quickly touch upon one of the regulatory avenues that we have created under this sixth iteration of the Prescription Drug User Fee Act, that is a novel pathway of model-informed drug development paired meeting pilot program. This was kicked off in 2018. We have a publication sharing the early experience and impact, which you can take a look at. It provides a unique pathway for the model-informed drug development applications to have a dedicated forum for discussion on how these approaches can be applied for specific decisions in drug development. And we are seeing a lot of uptake. With every passing year, we are seeing a lot of applications for this meeting request, and they are happening across a wide range of therapeutic areas as shown here. And through this particular pathway, we have been able to show 4 regulatory approvals, which have all been very critical in this current pandemic situation, providing very unique dosing optimization and dosing recommendations without the need for additional clinical evaluations, entirely relying on model-informed drug development approaches. So, trying to bring this back full circle, what do we expect going forward? We expect to see integration of MIDD throughout the drug development, and we expect to have these dedicated pathways become more formalized so that there are clear avenues for engagement on model-informed drug development issues. We are also hoping to make investments in managing the data and information, and make sure some of these guidances and policies that we are developing, they are also reflected at a global level through international harmonization. For any consistent application, we realize that we need to have standards for data analysis, inference, and reporting, and that needs to come from the grassroots, from the community, for them to be able to be applicable. And mostly we are making significant investments in education and training so that we can see that the uptake of these approaches is made feasible in day-to-day practice. So in summary, feel that there is a long history of pharmacometrics or MIDD approaches in drug development and regulatory review, and that a holistic and an integrative approach is critical to advance MIDD, and we are very optimistic that MIDD is well positioned to become one of the accepted standard disciplines as part of drug development and regulatory decision making. Thank you for your attention, and look forward to the question and answers.
Great, thank you very much, Raj. That was a really nice presentation, and good to see that progression of the USFDA over that time period. You kind of covered my whole lifetime span in pharmacometrics in that space, so that was quite interesting to see. So I wanted to bring in some questions first. I'll start off, and then I just ask members that are online, if you have any questions you'd like to add, please add them in the chat, and we'll try to bring them in. I see one that's and two that are already there. And then Bernd, maybe I'll call on you to help me with any questions that are in the room as well, as they come up. So first, I have one question for Kristen. You know, it's interesting to see your M&S working party and that representation from a number of different countries across the EU, and your comment about not all countries have the same degree of strengths in terms of their capabilities to be able to do perhaps assessments effectively. Is that work out fine across the EU in terms of relying on the strengths of other countries to help inform decisions in the group together, or is there a strong desire to try to bring every country up to the same level?
A little bit of both. I think with the peer review system that we have sort of captures if there's any major losses in the pieces missing from an evaluation, and it rarely happens, I would say. But of course, you want to have the agencies up to speed such that they can make a full assessment on their own. And I think for new applications, it's only the bigger agencies in Europe that have full capacity and do the new chemical entity assessments. So a small country like Malta would not be the rapporteur for a new chemical entity. You have to be assigned such a procedure. You have to show that you have the full team available to you. If you don't have it in your agency, you can team up in multinational teams. So it's to be able to do a full large assessment. You have to show that you have the capacity within your assessment team. But it's still difficult to have every small scale. And as Raj said, we are increasing the number of different approaches and different techniques, and it's very hard to put that demand on every agency to have that capacity. So we need to have these type of other fora to share our expertise, but also within the peer review system, we help each other out.
That's great, thanks. And then Raj, a quick question for me on your progression over that 30 years to see that advancement over that time. I'm curious if we're going to start again today from fresh, could we make that same progression in 10 years instead of 30? All right, so I'm putting my best Trevor Mundell, pushing hard on moving forward fast. I'd be curious, how much do you think we could learn to expedite that speed up in the future?
Yeah, I think we have 3 decades of experience. Definitely, there are a lot of learnings that we have had, and there is no reason for us to replicate from scratch the things that we have been able to achieve. I'm truly optimistic if we were to start today with the knowledge that we have had. I'm fairly confident that we would be able to cut down that progression by at least half. That's my personal view, and I hope that's what our learning should at least translate into. And we have seen in many instances that the learnings from one particular aspect have translated to another particular aspect of applications. For example, PDPK did not take the same timeline for it to mature into, for example, regulatory realm, what, let's say, a conventional POP-PK or exposure response took. These took longer times compared to these. And I'm pretty sure that some of the emerging technologies probably are going to cut some of that time down, because we are trying to address the novel aspects that come up with these approaches, as opposed to repeat the same aspects that we went through with respect to, say, a conventional nonlinear mixed effects modeling, for example. That's as an example. So a simple answer is, I'm pretty sure we should be able to shave off a good amount of time. It wouldn't be the same.
Yeah, that's great. And that's a good example with the PDPK uptake. I think that really shows the relevance there. One question that I see in the chat from Justin Hay asking if there are forums for MIDD and MNS dialogue between the agencies beyond ICH. And I'll add to that. I'm just curious if, do either of you, Kristen or Raj, have an example where you took an assessment from EMA and just said, well, they've already done the PK, so we don't have to do it. We can just use theirs. Or vice versa. EMA says, well, Raj's team has already done it, so we don't have to do it. We can just use that. I'm just curious how much of that is even possible as an approach.
Yeah, I think the easier question here is to answer is about the availability of forum beyond the ICH, and maybe I should give a little bit of clarification with respect to ICH also. The ICH is getting started with the model-informed drug development. They got endorsed to form an informal working group, and if it tracks along, it will end up with an expert working group, and that's where it'll be the incubator for global harmonization on MIDD related aspects. Beyond that, so that's yet to happen. So it's happening, and formally it will happen in near future also. The other forum, and Kirsten is also aware of this one, is there is a cluster on pharmacometrics which meets at regular intervals, and these provide opportunities to share experiences. We in fact share case studies that would benefit from others becoming aware of certain applications. It also provides an avenue for actually having or fostering a dialogue on how things were achieved and what are the other perspectives with respect to some of the applications. We might have an exact same case study that had a different outcome with a different regulatory agency, but it provides us a common forum to share these perspectives and hopefully help us move towards more aligned positions going forward in future. I'll invite Kirsten to add any, if any, on this.
No, thank you, Justin, who used to be in the cluster meetings from MHRA previously. So yeah, we had the cluster meetings for pharmacometrics. There are also other clusters for other aspects. So I think one of the more collaborative one is the pediatrics cluster that meets every month. And then ICH have, of course, we have the MIDD coming up later this year, we think, but also other guidelines as the ICH 11A pediatric extrapolation. And so there, of course, and also the one that Raj is involved in, the drug-drug interaction one. So there's aspects of MIDD and other ICH for as well. But those are the main ones, I would say.
Great. Bernd, any question from the room that I'll give a chance to?
Yes, there's one question from here.
Yes, hello, Samuel Muksasi, Surtara. I just wanted to ask the regulatory agencies whether we've seen improvement in the rate of success of approvals over the years or not yet.
That's an interesting question. Can I ask for clarification? What do we mean by improvement in the rate of approvals? Are we talking about approvals of drugs per se, or?
Yeah, like here in this forum, we don't need to justify pharmacometrics. And like one of the statistics, like we've seen many times, is like rate of failure in phase 3 is about half. Of course, it depends on what therapeutic areas. And our goal with using more quantitative methods is to improve, to not lose billions of dollars of failed drugs. So that's the point of my question.
I see. Well, drug development and its success is a very multifactorial, multidimensional kind of an activity. I'm pretty sure we all the drug developers as well as from the regulatory agencies, we are always trying to utilize all the possible tools that we have in the armamentarium to be able to ensure that there is a successful drug development activity that is done. So given that there are so many of these aspects, it will be very hard to really identify if there was one particular approach that helped with identifying successes. Definitely, we have seen, at least from USFDA, that there are more approvals maybe in last 5 years compared to the previous 5 years, for example, and that could be chalked up to any number of reasons. But if we are talking about the utility or application or acceptability of pharmacometrics or model-informed approaches, I think I am fairly confident to say that there is an increased uptake, definitely over the past few years, and we hope for it to increase also. And that's why we are making these specific investments with specific regulatory pathways to be able to make sure that happens. I'm not sure if that helped address the question.
In any sense, Kristen, at all from EMA or EU that you're seeing in terms of, no, okay.
Then there's another question here from Tumi, and you still have questions? Yeah, so there are 3 questions from here.
Okay, I'll be quick. Thank you for the excellent presentations. A question from me is, in terms of post-authorization surveillance and monitoring then of products that you would have approved based on this in silico data, do you manage them differently to those that you would have authorized based on, real data being provided? Thank you.
Maybe Kristen, I'll tee that one up to you around that stratification that you had about how strict and.
Not consistent. It's not like if it's an in silico approach, you have to have some post-authorization measure. It more comes down to the uncertainty in any evaluation. But if you rely on an in silico approach, you have confidence in that. So you don't rely on it as, say, we have less confidence in that than we would have had in clinical data. So it depends on what remaining uncertainties we have, but not on the method per se.
I would like to echo what Kirsten said. If we have applied, if we have made a regulatory decision, whether it be based on empirical data or it's based on application of model-based approaches to inform that regulatory decision, we do not treat them as 2 different things seeking different post-action follow-up. We would treat both as similar. Otherwise, it would not even rise to the level of making the decision.
Good, and the next question from Barnett.
Okay, thank you very much. Mine is just looking at if you are dealing in an environment where you have a static or a limited legal framework, which might be the problem with a number of countries within the region. How does this affect possibly getting some of these things to action and giving the regulatory authorities possibly the capacity to enact some of these things and possibly implement them? Because we're already seeing that the legal framework even has a constraint on the conduct of research in some of these specific spaces. How did you deal with that possibly within the EMA or within the US framework so that you can see how we can possibly jumpstart this, possibly to enable this taking up within the region?
Yeah, it's a great question, Bernard. Thanks, Raj. I mean, maybe you had policy in the center of your slide there in terms of the impact, and so how has that translated from action into policy that then enables you to make these decisions? Because you don't have the authority to just decide we're going to do this on our own, right? So I think that's the question that Dr. Agutu is getting to there.
Sure, and maybe I can provide a little bit of clarification. When we put out scientific guidelines, they are not always rooted in some kind of a legal authority, or there are very few of those guidelines which are rooted in in legal authority. But most of these scientific guidelines are good practices, good recommendations that are aimed and that are developed from communities' input with an intention that by applying those good principles, the likelihood of success will increase. That's the thought process and hope. So by putting these guidelines out there and by engaging the community and as well as the various stakeholders on the value of this, we are actually working on a pathway where we are trying to show the value of some of these on how they will play out. And that's how we are operating on. We are not operating on a stick principle that this is required and you have to do it. And over a period of time, the success stories themselves make them sustainable. And those will then develop into further policies or guidelines that will help sustain this particular cycle. Most of the things that we are engaged in, they are rarely fully required by a legal expectation or expectation from the governments. I don't know if that helped address the question.
Yeah, that was very good clarification, and I'm conscious that we're at the top of the hour and Kristen needs to leave. Any comments that you would like to say beforehand regarding that issue of the legality of being able to use these decision or model-based approaches into decision making and how that process moves in the EU?
No, I have the same view as Raj. I have never come across that we have a legal problem with that, so I can't really answer that any further.
Can we take a last question here from the room from Katrina?
Sure, go ahead. And then if Kristen, if you have to leave, that's okay. We understand, but thank you.
Thank you for permitting my question at the top of the hour. Katrina, I'm from Liverpool and Uganda. I'm interested, I think, mainly to Raj. Do you ever get a situation where your in-house modelers reach a different conclusion than the modelers of the sponsor? And how often might that happen? And what would you do if it happens? Because a lot of the questions I get asked are to do with how confident can we be? And yeah, what is your perspective on that? Thank you. I can see you smiling, so I know it's a real problem.
It's an excellent question. There is no doubt about it. And I want to say it happens with some frequency. I don't think we have compiled any statistics as to what frequency, but based on my experience and interaction, it does happen with some frequency. Specifically when there are implications for, let's say, a labeling or things of that nature. I think that's where if there are differences, if any. And there are some avenues for interactions during the conventional regulatory life cycle of that particular submission. Let's say during an NDA or a BLA review, we have various meetings with the sponsors called as late cycle meetings, post mid-cycle meetings and things of that nature, wherein the companies or the sponsors get some insights or heads up with respect to some of these, because there are negotiations on specific labeling that happens. And that's where probably the sponsors may be first introduced to differences, if any. But I think the bigger question is, given that we have 30 years of experience in this particular field, we should more often than not come to the same conclusion, irrespective of it is an analysis that is done by a regulator or if it is done by a CRO or a company or in a different country, for that matter of fact. The only things that may eventually impact here is the unique context around that particular drug submission, the other ancillary information that needs to be taken into account for that particular population or indication of interest. But the modeling related aspects should more often than not converge, irrespective of who did that. And we think that's very important from a multiple angles. We simply cannot grow in the government to 100 pharmacometricians or 200 pharmacometricians. That's not going to happen. We are happy that we have grown from a group of 6 to 35, and we want to grow a little bit more, but we know that there is a cap somewhere there and it will stop, and it's not going to happen. And that will limit our ability to be able to independently perform analysis at every instance. So that's why we think it's very important for us as a community to have a certain set of guidelines, practices, recommendations for data, as well as analysis methods and things of that nature, which we hope will take away most of these differences that may happen between modelers to modelers and things of that nature. So that's the hope. At some point of time, we will have the kind of clarity that 10 different people, when they are given with a problem and an approach to apply it, they are going to come up more often than not with the same way to be able to slice that particular pie. Hopefully that happens sooner than later.
Raj, I like that you're talking about standards and processes that are open. You use the word openness, and I think that's a really key component so people can see this is how we came to our decision. It's not a hidden decision in the background. And Kristen, of course, said the same thing as well. She even used the idea of peer review as essentially a metric for that. So I think that's great. I'm going to take one more question from Stuart Walker, who's been sitting patiently with his hand raised online. And then also mention that Norman Nazema and Jeff Barrett, I'll get to your questions in the second half as well, because I think they're going to be good to tee up. Go ahead, Stuart.
Well, thank you very much for two outstanding presentations on pharmacometrics. I've really enjoyed that, and I've learned a great deal, even though that's part of my background over the years. And my question is that obviously you have enormous resources, both within the FDA and within the EMA. Now, when we come to Africa, many of the regulatory authorities across the African continent will not have that amount of resource. They probably won't even have with due respect, the expertise within the agency to look at pharmacometrics in the way in which you are able to do it. Is there any way in which your organization can provide some sort of service or help when an agency in Africa is faced perhaps with these data, which may be unusual because probably the product may well have been already reviewed elsewhere, so they're doing a reliance, but is there any way in which your organization can provide some help and support to an agency that wants to actually evaluate that type of data?
That's a very interesting question. We'll definitely have to give some thought to what kind of avenues that might be available. We do have something that we can look up to. I'm not saying that might be fully applicable, but in the oncology space, there is this aspect called as Project Orbis, wherein multiple regulatory agencies are collaborating at the exact same time to be able to facilitate drug or biologics approvals at the same time, such that they are exchanging information in real time. Maybe there is something to that could be looked at, but those are the thoughts top of my head. Have really not given this much of a thought, but a good question to think about it. And I'm not sure I have come across in my experience of any outreach to that end. We have had retrospective outreaches from a specific regulatory agency that we have done this. We see your regulatory reviews that are out there in public domain. Can you help us better understand? Those have happened, and the clusters have been hub for having those interactions. But you raise a very interesting question that's worth giving some more thought here.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, and I'll say from yesterday's presentation, both Tumi and Bernd talked about a very nice structure of that progression of individual learning from regulators to keep them engaged in, and that the Africans have that context already established in how they're developing. It's not hard to then think about twinning experiences maybe with EMA or with FDA, right? Because there's those structures that exist that might be able to take advantage of. They then get back to some of the legal authorities to be able to do that Bernard brought up and that Colin also put a point about in the chat. So I think we can tie those together for the second half of the conversation. So I want to be conscious of time and have us move on. So Raj, thanks. And I know you have a deadline at 1, but I would love having you to stay as long as you can. And then I'll turn it over now to Dr. Jeff Barrett from the CPATH organization in the United States. And Jeff is going to tell us about some really interesting training opportunities that, again, could be interesting or to think about how we could make this global in terms of its potential opportunity and impact. Over to you, Jeff.
Thanks, Steve. I'm trying to share slides now, so hopefully they're loading in a few seconds.
They're coming up, it looks like now, so.
Okay.
Yep, there we are. Great, perfect.
Can you see them okay, or should I try to make them bigger?
No, they're fine.
Yes, we can see them well here.
Okay, all right, great. So you heard from Raj and from Kristen the big investment you see from regulatory authorities to promote MIDD to a great extent, and to also staff up with talented scientists who have the mission of advancing this area, and also complement those of us who are outside of the regulatory environment to make sure that quality submissions are advanced forward, and that they have the staff on board to ensure that timely reviews are conducted when this type of submission ensues. So I think a unique opportunity occurred in the wake of this, and what we see in this session is that this is the community of believers. So this is not always the case when we go outside of organizations such as WCoP and ISOP. So I think we're preaching to the choir a little bit, but with the improved facilitation of MIDD across different sectors, and that being academia, industry, nonprofits, CROs, there's a growing need to continue education and providing education materials to normalize the playing field, but also to make sure that the multidisciplinary aspects of the MIDD experience are continued to be nurtured in a meaningful way, so that it continues to be grown from the ecosystem that is going to be responsible. So this is something that FDA in particular has recognized that they need to provide resources to. So I think, again, on the concept of sharing, this is something where early on there was an opportunity to develop some materials and to provide them to a broader community. Now, I think one of the unique opportunities in this whole effort that I'm going to share with you in a couple minutes is FDA recognizing that they would like to see investment in the constituent multidisciplinary scientists who come together during the normal review process to give them some experience in MIDD and appeal to their knowledge gaps specifically. So this was a grand opportunity that was open for public submission, and CPATH was fortunate enough to apply to and receive the grant. But the original thinking was that FDA would provide 4 primary themes used as the basis for the development of training materials to really enhance and enrich the training experience provided to a broader group of constituent scientists who are involved in regulatory reviews. Now, recognizing that not everybody is receptive to this type of materials, we had to quickly learn from FDA who the audience was, and this was really translational scientists across the regulatory environment, and be able to construct by those who were knowledgeable in the area materials that would speak to the knowledge gaps, but also allow them a variety of training experiences that would fill the gaps, and also give them unique experiences so that they could continue to learn on their own, in addition to orchestrated materials that were generated from this faculty. The target was initially 16 hours of video content in addition to slide content broken up into 8 2-hour topics. I'm showing you the initial thoughts that were presented here on an introduction on the MIDD landscape, review of the common model types, how do models inform drug development and regulatory decision, various scenario testing examples and experiences, demonstration of the interconnectedness of different model types that are used in the MIDD approach, making decisions with and without data, and the number of examples and vignettes that would really substantiate the process and show good examples across the continuum and across therapeutic areas. And finally, some forward-looking materials on looking at future goals of MIDD, and in particular on how more recent cutting-edge topics such as artificial intelligence and machine learning, as well as the use of real-world data and real-world evidence to inform model-based drug development. The landscape here was really recognizing that the field has advanced where these models are interconnected. They're done in a very coordinated fashion now. That wasn't always the case. You saw from Raj's presentation, this was really an evolution of the science in different pockets. So what we've learned over the last 50 years of really investment in this area is that these models can come together in an integrated fashion. They can inform decision-making of various types, and they can also be integrated in a fashion such that they learn from and inform each other, such as there's opportunity for backward feedback and knowledge sharing, even to the discovery part of drug development all the way through the commercial and post-launch. So it's really a process that's been embraced by many pharmaceutical sponsors, but with the knowledge that this needs to be integrated. This has spurred innovation on not just the collection of data, the curation of data, the ability to curate data of high quality, but also in constructing complementary model types that allow us to really look at this as a continuum as opposed to siloed models. Now, in initiating this effort, we gathered a diverse faculty representing industry, academia, the nonprofit sector, as well as scientists from different regulatory communities. So you might recognize Raj there with the glasses on, but anyway, we really benefited from this diversity of community because everybody weighed in on the content of the material, and many of the faculty listed here also provided some of the training materials themselves. So this was really a community-based effort. And I don't want you to think that it was just the steering committee that lended a hand here. I have to give a huge shout out to Craig Rainier at Satara because he did a masterful job guilt tripping, particularly industry scientists, into providing vignettes that were very well done and in a lot of detail so that any trainee can come into the system. They know what the model-based approach was utilized, the impact that it strove to achieve, and whether or not it actually achieved that purpose. And a huge shout out obviously to FDA because they weighed in on every aspect of this before the material was loaded into the learning management system, which I'll show you in a few minutes. FDA weighed in, they gave us feedback. We had this feedback loop in which the material were modified, further refined. So it was kind of pre-digested to make sure that it achieved its purpose and that it was able to be instructional to translational scientists who would participate in the review process. We also had the good fortune of using the funds to purchase a learning management system. This is really a home for a lot of the content. I'll show you some screenshots in a few minutes, but this is really a dynamic, it's a secure web-based environment that allows users to come into the system. They can review the content in a self-paced manner. They can assess their progress. They can take tests along the way. They can look at extraneous material that's provided as complementary resources to the training experience. There's an opportunity for Q&A capabilities and content suggestions. So it's a dynamic learning environment where we expect the student to really spend some time in there in a self-paced manner, but also to provide feedback so that this training experience evolves and improves over time. So some screenshots just to show you there's secure access here. We want to prevent hacking of the site. So this is already built into the system. There's a number of training modules that can be loaded into this, so we're nowhere near having any capacity issues. There's the ability to search and find individual training modules within the whole family of available training modules that are already provided really on day one of the LMS system. It's very intuitive. There's a very customized user interface with the opportunity to take feedback and to do further refinement. There's also the opportunity to do testing along the way. So we haven't fully added all the testing capabilities there yet, but this is a way down the road of providing feedback to the learner on how they're absorbing the material as well as capture their experience. What we're expecting is that this training initiative will continue to grow. We are expecting to provide one-on-one online mentoring sessions with the regulatory faculty at FDA initially. So it's really just now provided. I will share with you that we now have 28 hours of video content that have been provided from the stakeholder community. So it's very rich, it's very detailed, and we're expecting this to grow. So I think what we all are counting on is that with this generous donation from the FDA to get this started and to invest heavily in this area, that this will be something that is shared to the global MIDD community, as well as rely on this community to further enhance and improve the training experience. So I would say that we're providing this now to FDA now. There will be an initial launch period where we'll go and get feedback from regulatory authorities. We will further refine the modules, and then hopefully after more broad testing this summer, that this will be provided to the broader community. So it's not vaporware, it's up and running now. We're expecting FDA to embrace and give us feedback along the way. And then at a point in the near future, we will share this to the entire MIDD community. So with that, I'd be happy to answer questions along the way.
Thanks, Jeff, very much for that presentation, and really great to see the progress that's made overall and how that's been going forward. And not hard to imagine, the ability to make this a global resource, as you had mentioned. What we're going to do at this point is let's go to Katrina's presentation, and then we'll have questions together at the end, if that's okay. And this is where we're going to be really interesting to see how hybrid meetings work, because we'll have a presentation in the room, which is great.
Yes, just need to access it. But I think generally this hybrid platform is working really well, and the feedback we've been getting is fantastic. So yeah, let us just find our slides and then we'll start.
Yes, and I most recently in the last month gave a presentation where I was holographically transmitted to the Global Health Building at Oxford from Seattle. So I was able to give my presentation. Yeah, I gave my presentation in 3D in Oxford, so that was quite interesting.
Yeah, I don't want to be transported in such a way. I would scare people. The top one. Great. Well, I will start by doing my introduction just whilst they retrieve the slides, because this conference has been amazing. And I think one really, really strong theme that has come out throughout yesterday, throughout today, in fact, in many of the talks, is just how important it is that we all engage together between academics, regulators. We have these conversations, we have this dialogue, and we sort of demystify to one another what the other side is doing. I think we often tend to work in silos, and maybe we're not comfortable in different environments, but we need to actually work together more and more so that we have that high quality data that we can trust, that actually impacts upon real lives and real populations. So for me, it feels like a real honor to be giving the presentation to such an esteemed audience as this. Can you see my slides now? No. Okay, it will just take a moment.
We saw them for a moment, Tokozo, and then they went away.
It was yes. Wonderful.
Okay, great. And
we're there now?
Yep, we're there. Just put it in presentation mode and we're good to go.
Hey, that's strange. Enable editing. Some people know these tricks. So excellent. And then
but then we lost you now.
Oh dear. So anyway, what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be drawing from some of our experiences in Uganda alongside the Pharmacometrics team, and then perhaps explaining how we want to take it one step further and start to develop other modules and other resources which enable the training that we all need. Often we talk about how clinical pharmacologists need training in regulatory matters. Sometimes the regulatory authorities and ethics committees and so forth require some training in pharmacometrics. So that is what I'm going to be talking about today. Do feel free to tweet or share these slides. But when it all comes down to it, actually, I think all of us in this room are doing what we do because we want to make a difference to patients. And it is ethically essential. So I'm going to remove my mask whilst I'm talking. It's ethically essential that we study drugs in the population who are going to receive those drugs. So if it's a woman presenting with HIV in the 3rd trimester of pregnancy in the Kampala slums, we need to design trials that get right out to that patient. We need to be able to get data that she can access and she can understand. And it's not just ethically essential that we do those studies, but it's ethically essential that we do them well. And that's where all this model-informed drug development, the design of studies, particularly in complex and vulnerable populations such as pregnancy and childhood, that's where we can really use these tools to design efficient, highly ethical studies that minimize the invasive nature of them, minimize the number of participants, and actually really maximize the use of the data and look at all the different variability and how that translates into policy and practice. This is one of our participants from the Dolphin-1 study, dolutegravir in pregnant HIV mothers and their neonates, and actually the findings of that did go on to inform WHO policy. So when I think about what a pharmacology group requires, I think there's four main pillars. As mentioned already, it all starts with the communities, and that's where we see clinical problems arising. That's where we see different complex scenarios that we don't have answers to. And we go on and we do our clinical trials. And in Africa, we're very strong at that. We do this all the time. But there's more to it than that, isn't there? Because in clinical pharmacology trials, we normally measure some drug in some body fluid at some point. And we need to be able to measure those drugs. And historically, we've always tended to send samples out of the countries and have them done elsewhere. Now, there are sometimes very good reasons for that. But as we start doing some of these more adaptive study designs, studies that perhaps there are no prior data, we might want to do interim analyses and things like that. If we have the laboratory on site, we can actually do that much more seamlessly. And there does need to be an investment in bioanalytical capacity. But of course, that requires quite big equipment and quite a few real challenges. But perhaps the modeling less so, because for modeling, as Paolo said in one of his talks at the start, you need a good computer, a bright mind, and good mentorship and support. And if we have the pharmacometricians on site, we can also continually feed back. Sometimes there's a bit of a myth that modeling is a sort of thing that takes place at the end of a study as a kind of add-on, either to rescue bad data or to, try and make it somehow better. But actually, as we've learned in many of these talks, we have to have the modelers involved at every single step, right from study design through to design of the case report form so we capture the right data, right through to interim analysis and the analysis of the data themselves. And if we have a group like this that's continually communicating, we generate new ideas, new hypotheses, and really maximize the impact of our work. So I think most of us in the audience are familiar with the work of Pharmacometrics Africa, which has the vision to train, retain and mentor expert quantitative clinical pharmacology scientists. Importantly, to work on locally generated data affecting the populations that we live and work among. Yes, we want to attract international collaboration, but we want that to be in an equitable way. We want bi-directional knowledge transfer. We want the world to see that actually for these questions, the countries in Africa are the centers of excellence and knowledge, and we need to be actually taking some of that knowledge back to Europe, back to the States. It's something I'm doing currently on one of my Wellcome grants where I'm doing lactation pharmacology, and there's been almost none of that done in the UK. So the experts from Uganda will come with me to Liverpool and we can train the teams there. But I want to see much more of that bi-directional knowledge transfer. And you'll have seen this graphic already in the meeting too, but through Pharmacometrics Africa online and face-to-face, around 500 scientists have been trained. And there are certain sort of hotspots of excellence and hotspots where there's a real strengthening of capacity for modelling. And those would include Kenya. We've got people from Strathmore in the room. They would include Nigeria, South Africa, of course, but also Uganda. So we decided it was time to launch a bit of a regional hub. And the reason we selected the Infectious Diseases Institute at Makerere University was partly because a lot of us had been through Pharmacometrics Africa training, and a lot of us have had fellowships and PhDs that have had a modelling component. But also when you look at the portfolio of work we do, there's a lot of acronyms there, but they're not straightforward clinical trials. We don't tend to serve as a site for large multinational trials, but rather we do the more innovative dose escalations, things that require interim analyses, things that maybe require genotyping before even starting a drug. So things that really require the modelers and the laboratories on site. So this portfolio really lends itself to having a stronger pharmacometrics input. And so as we brought the team together in Uganda, the first thing we did is we launched the 12-week online program. So it was actually the 6th iteration of the Pharmacometrics Africa course, but we did that out of Uganda between September and December last year. And the thing that was perhaps novel about this was that all the primary faculty members were Ugandan, and in that bracket, having lived there for 8 years. But in the true spirit of South-South collaboration, we had input from other key members of Pharmacometrics Africa group who gave input into specific topics. They helped us with the breakout. But also they provided mentorship to the Ugandan faculty, because we were a new young faculty and we actually need to learn how to teach. We need to learn how to teach in a virtual environment. We need to learn what to do when you're a tutor and you have a question you can't answer. So we had a lot of very interactive platforms going, different WhatsApp groups, different other ways of communication. And we had strong support from Colin Pillai, Paolo Denti and Leon Aarons. So when you look at the students we actually had, we deliberately went for quite a small class. And that was because we felt very strongly that it's not just enough to teach the skills and have people go through the classes, but we really wanted that mentorship and that individual relationship. You can see that most of our students were either pharmacists or other medical professionals, and that raised the idea that we need to start engaging with some other faculties at Makerere, for example, maths and engineering. And I'll talk a bit more about that in a moment. We did prioritize Ugandan students because we wanted to be able to actually build those relationships. But at the same time, in the spirit of equity, we advertised it openly and we did have students from around the world. And when it came to the time when they gave feedback, you can see that the comments were broadly divided into two groups. So people were very thankful for the actual things they'd learned about pharmacometrics and the skills and the introduction to the tools and how they plan to use it. But there was also a lot of very strong and positive feedback about being part of a community, about having had the faculty members available. We had little tutor groups, but we also had a more wide WhatsApp group. So it meant that if a student asked a question, there was always somebody to pick it up, and we worked together as a team. And it was very encouraging to actually get that degree of feedback. But why is that relevant to this audience now, and where do we go next, and what do we want to see in Uganda, but also much more widely across Africa? So one of the first things was we realized there was a need for more engagement. Again, a big theme of this conference. Sometimes people don't involve pharmacologists in certain projects because they don't know that we're here, they don't know why we matter, they don't know why they should collaborate with us. And we use a lot of very technical terms, pharmaco this, pharmaco that, and people just don't understand what we're doing. And I've been quite shocked that even fellow physicians don't know what we do, fellow scientists don't know what we do. So we realized this was a problem, and it was right in the middle of lockdown. So we made a couple of short documentaries that we showed at the British Pharmacological Society conference to try and demystify pharmacology, to try and get out there. You guys who are doing studies on cardiology drugs or cancer drugs, you need a pharmacologist on your protocol, and you also need to design your study well so that you don't end up giving Paolo really rubbish data down the line, which is something I think we have all experienced. But we're going to be doing more engagement work, and I've got 2 public engagement officers starting in my team on Friday, which is really exciting. Another problem has been this career progression. So I think many of us have known people that get to master's or PhD level, but then they don't have a natural postdoctoral career route within African settings. And that is actually a huge topic to discuss. But I'm very thankful that through my Welcome Grant, I've appointed 2 postdoctoral modelers, both of whom are attending this conference. You will have seen Ida around, Francis is virtual, and they both also start on Friday. Having a little bit of a team expansion on Friday, which is a really exciting time. They will be working on the data and supporting the design and analysis of studies. They'll be mentoring the more junior people involved in modelling. They'll also be involved in engagement, but one of their key roles will also be the development of further resources and materials. So Pharmacometrics, our data is absolutely dependent on the high quality of data collection. I don't know if anybody in the room has ever received a data set that is so bad that you can't do anything with it. I unfortunately have, and what I learned from that was the absolutely essential nature to drum into your study team exactly why you have to collect the time point, and if you take a sample late, that's probably okay so long as you record what time you did take it at. And we found that our teams actually improve a lot and are very empowered when we just do these basic background to clinical pharmacology. They don't need to know what we do with the data, but they need to understand what bad data can do and how it can actually jeopardize the whole study. So through the virtual consortium, it's an EDCTP funded grant. We've done a couple of short courses in Kampala, and the general feedback was the study teams want something more and they want it to be regular. And that raises the question of almost having a rolling curriculum for study team members. So that's the study teams, but what about the regulators? So if I write a protocol that's got a sort of physiologically based PK modeling involved in the dose prediction that goes into a trial, and then I've got some pop PK modeling at the end, the people that review that protocol need to understand what it is I'm doing. They don't need to understand the details, sure, but they need to understand what this technique is, almost like that previous discussion now. Why can we trust the data? And what questions do they need to ask? And similarly, regulators, you need to understand the data that's coming out. And I might not actually know what your questions are. So we almost need to do a little bit of a needs assessment, perhaps, to see what exactly should go into such materials. And I've been having a lot of conversations with Pumla and Kadi in the room about a sort of modelling for non-modelers course. And that's something that, rather than reinventing the wheel in every location, how about as Pharmacometrics Africa team, we come together and develop some of these other modules that can be used more widely, and then we can perhaps tailor them slightly to individual situations. So I think my conclusion is that modeling is absolutely essential. And as we move into complex patient groups, difficult clinical scenarios, the kind of situations we actually see every day in clinic, these modeling tools are key. We need to use them well. We need to engage with people to explain what we're doing and why. We need to answer difficult questions and not feel that we're hiding anything. And we need to have more dialogue with multi-partners as we're doing now. So I think it's now time to hand back to the chairs and open the floor for some discussion. Thank you.
That was great. Thank you very much, Katrina. That was really wonderful. And I really enjoyed the tie back to the clinical experience so that we think about this aspect of pharmacometrics, not only for regulatory submissions, but actually helping to take care of patients for sure. I want to first, let's maybe first start off with some questions into the room. And if there are any in the room.
Yes, there are some questions. Kennedy?
Yeah. Thanks, Katrina and everyone else for the talk. I'm actually finding this meeting quite interesting because I'm a statistician by profession. I work for the Perinatal HIV Research Unit. At any one given time in our unit, we have 30 to 40 clinical trials running. And you know, this pharmacometrics thing, we don't do it. All this work goes away. It's actually quite interesting. I'm going to have to chat with my CEO after this meeting. I'll tell him, listen, I'm from this meeting, and look, we have to build capacity in this. Given the fact that I'm now part of the faculty in pharmacometrics, and you know, this is going to help a lot. And I really truly appreciate this. And in fact, I have a study that I'm supposed to oversee that's going to be looking at those response modeling. And so it's a good opportunity for me actually to push for this agenda. And I really appreciate listening to all the talk that I've had here today. Thank you.
Any further questions? There's one question that I would like to ask Jeff, because on your slide with all the different elements included in pharmacometrics, what all belongs to it, I've also seen pharmacoeconomics there. Can you make a comment on how you link actually pharmacoeconomic evaluations in your activities and your modeling activities?
Sure. So a great question. I think we all appreciate that eventually we'd like to see the drug development end up in a submission and eventually a marketplace performance. And I think we're now moving into a more value-based economy where you judge these products in terms of their actual clinical performance on the marketplace. So there's the availability of particularly real-world data to assess the effectiveness of many of these compounds against either the current standard of care or against each other. So that provides an opportunity to both utilize that data to judge how well your phase 3 experience predicted marketplace performance, but also to give feedback to a sponsor to maybe compounds that they have in earlier stages of development in terms of candidate selection. So there's an implicit feedback loop there, but also the commercial groups themselves have to deal with things like reimbursement in the first place, and also making sure that there's access to these new medicines in a global capacity. So the relationship between health economic data and what would be more traditional, let's just say, exposure response outcome data can be linked in a meaningful way so that you can earlier on judge the expected marketplace performance, but also you can learn from the marketplace performance to modify and inform your portfolio.
And Bernard, another question from here.
Okay, thank you very much. I think this is not a question, but I think it's high time we get a few social scientists to join pharmacometrics to tell the story. Because I think, as all of us know, that in the last 2-3 decades, mathematics would have died. But computing has brought mathematics back to the table. And now everybody is talking data. And that's where modeling has now, mathematics has been revived. And I think all of us know that all doctors go to the medical school, and when they get out, there's very little pharmacology actually they have, but they spend all their life prescribing drugs. So actually, they might be sending more guys to the grave than saving them. And I think this is where we need to start rediscovering pharmacology to the clinical community. It might be, people might not find it, but I think it's because the last 2 years, it has been hard to get postgraduates do a project in pharmacokinetics, so just because the clinical lecturers don't see the need. They're spread ready to fund the students. And I think this is where we have an opportunity with this now gaining ground to possibly start getting the clinical family onto the table to understand the critical nature of understanding pharmacology as the basis of patient care. Because we throw drugs at people and we never think of what happens.
Thank you for that excellent, or both excellent comments, reinforcing the role of pharmacometrics and more to do in this field. With this, I don't see any burning questions here, so I give it back to the...
One question is before you go to Samir.
Sorry, there is another one.
But I'll hold off. One quick question as a follow-up before we go to Samir. I just want to ask a question of the African regulators in the room. Could we imagine a future where, when we have enough confidence in this model-informed drug development effort and the pharmacoeconomics component is built on, that if a company comes to the AMA to basically, ask for a drug to be used that's been available in other regions of the world, and you look at that data and say, that looks like a so-so drug. It's not really that differentiating, that maybe the Africans would not take or accept a drug that the Europeans and the Americans are already using because its relative benefits not that great and the cost benefits not worth it. And that'd be interesting to think about how much the Africans could learn from the experience of what is and isn't working in other countries. And I don't know, Tumi, if that's a challenge you would love to take on. It would be really interesting to think about.
Yeah, I mean, certainly, one of the things that we are seeing is, for example, with generics, wherein a lot of us sit with a number of generics being submitted to us to evaluate. And, we have resource constraints, right? So we can't get through it as efficiently as we need to. And you may see that you are sitting with the 100th paracetamol being submitted to you. And such modeling becomes important, right, in enabling us. And I know your question is around, NCEs, et cetera, and considering costs. But this is the intelligence that I think as regulators we need, particularly in our context where we're so resource constrained that we don't have the luxury and the large numbers of assessors, that EMA and the FDA has. We do need to be creative. We do need intelligent data to enable us to make those trade-offs, because we will need to do that at some point. So certainly, Stephen, I think this is, I'll make some concluding remarks, but yeah, certainly. I don't know if you want to comment, Joseph.
Okay, thank you, Johannes Joseph, Namibia. As Tumi said, obviously, if you do not have the resources and you can use the modeling to enlighten your decision, probably that's a better route to use instead of having more people that you are not able to get in any case. So that's probably a more sell reason why we should probably invest more in such an approach. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you both. And that's, a little bit to the question that Dorban Zema had asked about how much weight is really put on the in silico results in the MIDD process. And Jeff also followed up with, can you envision a future in which MIDD-based approaches substitute for discrete experiments that are currently required in the submission, right? And he was referring to the IND and NDA. But as Tumi just said, perhaps we can look at a modeling-based approach so that the 100th paracetamol process is a lot more model-informed than perhaps the first was. Back to you, Bernd, in the room, and to Samir's
We have one more question here.
Yes, thanks, Steve. My question or / comment was really when the person before was talking about medical doctors or clinicians don't believe in the need of pharmacometrics. And I had a question, I don't know if Raj is still around, on the regulatory perspective. How far are we from like an electronic label where the label can tell the MD to be able to prescribe your drug, okay, you need to input some patient characteristics, and boom, you have a predicted dose based on the model. So currently we have some kind of table sometimes, depending, you break down, but our models becoming more and more sophisticated. So we cannot just have a simple table. And recently we have the approval of a medical device, the PK-Fit software, to individualize like a drug that was we know about. So how far are we from a regulation perspective of having like a dose label based on model? Really, like to be able to dose your patient, you need a model to tell you what dose.
I see Raj has come back on, so why not, I'll let Raj take a stab at that, and then Jeff, maybe as a follow-up, you had your hand up.
Yeah, this is an excellent question, and this also came up several years ago when we had the precision dosing workshop on campus at the FDA a couple of years ago, before the pandemic. That's an ideal future state that we all aspire. But we also understand that there are certain legal challenges that we will have to first resolve. I think that's the bottleneck at this point of time. I think for many of us, it's a no-brainer. It makes sense, meaning that's how we look at the data. That's how we inform many of our decisions. But when it comes to the labels, we dichotomize many of our decisions, and that's how it has been happening. And there is a lot of history to this, which also puts a lot of weight for us to work against some of these. Historically, we have been a very heavy empirical based decision making community at large. So it's a work in progress. I think eventually we will get there, but we are not there at this point of time, if I were to give an honest answer here.
And Jeff, did you want to follow up?
Yeah, I'll just add, I mean, having sat on the Therapeutic Standards Committee of a pediatric hospital, I could tell you that, you know, none of the people sitting around that table would look to the label for dosing guidance per se. I mean, I think this is something where, you know, we can have all these expectations for regulatory authorities, but they're not necessarily involved in the practice of medicine to the same extent. I think, again, as Raj pointed out, we should do the best we absolutely can in terms of having an informative label, but we really need to get to these prescriber stakeholder communities and inform them, and also to kind of take a look at who the thought leaders are in each of these areas, and to make sure that they feel confident in the dosing information that they're getting, and understand what they feel the knowledge gaps are, so that we have more targeted education in those areas.
Thanks. That's a great point, Jeff. And I think that distinction between clinical practice and the label is an important one. It was getting a little bit to what Bernard was asking before about the legal authority to be able to do some of these things, and they are intertwined, and they do sometimes constrain the abilities of clinicians, or at least scientists, to practice and try experiments as well. So I'm being conscious of time because I know we need to have time for a wrap up. I have one more question here in the chat from Kenta Yoshida that I'd like to present. And it's a question for Katrina. Can you comment further on your view of high opportunity areas where the expanded PMX capacity in the regulatory space is helping clinical trials? Is it design, execution, or interpretation from the work that your team is involved with at IDI?
Gosh, it's quite a big question, and I don't know the detail in many countries, but certainly there is a change in the way things are seen. I mentioned the Dolphin 1 study, and we actually wrote the protocol prior to the licensing of dolutegravir. We wrote the protocol in 2012 because we knew clearly that this drug was going to be adopted and women in Africa would conceive on the drug. And we needed to get that pregnancy data. The FDA have said for years we must do pregnancy studies around the time of licensing in such products. We had a record of 3 years from site initiation visit until first patient, first visit, because basically because a regulator got concerned that we were, it's a long story, and I can see both sides of that story. I can see things that I would have done differently if I was to have my time again. Perhaps engaging earlier from the very, very start would have been helpful, rather than just submitting a slightly innovative protocol. But what I'm seeing now, I mean, that was 10 years ago. I think there's a greater trust, the sort of key relationships with regulators in those countries. So in Uganda, I can see how that's working out. I'm not so confident about other countries, but I would say the principles are communication, building of key relationships, and trust. And I think that's something we should adopt wherever we are.
Great, thank you very much. I'm being conscious of time, Bernd, and I don't want to impinge too much on Dr. Tumi Semeta's closing remarks. So maybe what we'll do is thank all the presenters. This has really been a great and lively conversation. I could go on for another hour, I'm sure, but I don't want to delay dinner in Cape Town. So I would like to thank you all for participating. I think you've given us a lot of great feedback and ideas of some next areas that we can think together collaboratively as a team. I love the theme of collaboration. I love the comments about bringing in the other resources from statistics. I mean, if there's 30 statisticians that are sitting in a clinical trial center, those should be our sisters and brothers in arms in terms of improving the clinical trial endeavor in the continent. and also strong capability in mathematics and physics in Africa that I think can also be realized. So I look forward to this continuing to build on this momentum. And Tumi, we'll turn it back over to you at this point.
No, thank you so much. Firstly, just to thank the presenters. This was really an insightful session. I really personally learned a lot, and it demonstrates just the opportunities that lie with the use of technology in broadly the health sector, but also it gave us a number of ideas. So really very exciting session. I took some copious notes here, and it's been a while since I've taken notes like this. So really very exciting session. What this demonstrates also for me is that, you know, this is going to be ongoing practice. And I think it's important that as regulators, we get on board, particularly a number of us who have not, you know, been reviewing pharmacometrics-based data. I think the question that Stuart asked is important to say, how do we start, you know, being part of these assessments? And I think the, you know, collaborative reviews or observing some reviews, etc., is always a good start. And so I'm, you know, particularly excited about, you know, continuous collaboration with Pharmacometrics Africa. I do think that as regulators, we should be standing participants in this conference. There's really just so much to gain. If you look at the agenda, the detail, you know, that in each of the sessions you go into in the subject is really amazing. So I would want, Colin, for us to continue this partnership and make sure that regulators participate in this conference, you know, into the future. What's even more exciting for me is that there are training programs that exist. So thank you so much, Jeff. Thank you so much, Katrina. I think you also brought it a lot to the field. We engage, you know, with clinical trial evaluations a lot. There are a number that we reject, and when we look at how modeling could assist in the trial design for whatever clinical endpoints, it really shows the value of this. I mean, one question that we are deliberating on, for example, at SAHPRA, is as now a large proportion of the population has been vaccinated for COVID, and yet there's still a lot of COVID vaccines being developed. And, you know, we are rejecting studies that are looking to have cohorts that are unvaccinated. The question I have is, what value could there be in modeling? You know, if you look at immune waning, if you look at, you know, so there's a number of factors that could be built onto a model to enable us with decision making as regulators. So personally, you know, I found a lot of value in the session. So I really just like to thank, you know, the presenters. I'd like to thank the Pharmacometrics Africa team, Bernd, Colin, you know, for recommending such phenomenal presenters. I also just want to thank all of you for your contribution and your participation over the last 2 days. It has been such a valuable 2 days that we've spent here. And again, thanks for the partnership with WCoP for us to be able to have these side meetings. As I say, Colin, I really am looking forward to this being a continued partnership. We're going to have and bring on board more of our sister regulators. And hot off the press, Nigeria has got an ML3 status. And so very exciting. So a number of us as regulators are really working hard to ensure that we embrace global standards. And this, I think, is one standard that we will certainly like to embrace. So thank you so much for this. And thanks to everyone for attending these 2 sessions, and also those on the virtual platform. Thank you so much. Colin, I don't know if you want to jump in. Are you good there?
Anything I say would be an anticlimax. Thank you, Tumi.
Thank you. We will then declare the session closed. Thank you.
Thank you. And Tumi, the only thing I'll add is I just wanted to thank Dukosa and the team there, the technical team, this has been probably the best technical meeting I've participated in 2.5 years of pandemic. So excellent job to our support in the room and in the facility. It's really been top notch. Thank you.
Thank you, and this session is closed.
Good night, good morning.
Oh.